This is the end of this book, and there's a starting with another?
Yes.
Or is it just
Next book is going to be a different topic. Hopefully we'll finish the chapter and I'll summarize how it's moving to a whole different discussion. Hi, everybody. We are starting chapter 34. Let me show you an introduction. Last week, chapter 33, the rabbi was speaking about the reason to live a very joyous life. And he gave us many reasons. The main reason, the main thrust was everything is God and God is everything. So we have an opportunity to provide, to create, to reveal God more in areas where God is not felt. And therefore, we should be so joyous that we're given that assignment. This is not given to everybody. We that were born here have that opportunity, and therefore there is an extreme opportunity, extreme purpose, reason for joy. We study and discover many other reasons to be joyous, based on that theme that God is everywhere and everything, and we, each one of us, all of us, including the building and the furniture, are part of God. And that's why it's all perfect, it's all for a purpose, and it's all good. However, the reality is that it's not so easy to apply in our day-to-day life. Last week, I was asked by Linda about faith versus trust. And I think that's what she was alluring to, so I want to take a moment and speak about. There is a famous story, I believe it should be a quite famous. There are many versions. I know at least two versions of it. I'm going to show the shortest version. The Tsar is visiting a farmer once. And the farmer, to prove how loyal is he to the Tsar, he turned to the Tsar and says, if I had a house, I would donate it to you. If I had a cow, I would give it to you. All that I have, I will do for you because I love you so much. And the Tsar turned to him and says, I saw a rooster outside. Can I have it? And he started crying and says, please, this is my only sustenance. The rooster and the hen, they provide eggs, and that's what the only thing I can have. Please, please don't take it. What happened? Did he lie? Did the farmer lie to the Tsar? He did not lie to the Tsar. He told the truth that he is very loyal and in love with the Tsar. However, there is a major distinction or barrier between action versus my mind, my desire. I want to prove the Tsar that I love him by giving him everything that he asks for, if I have it. But when it actually comes to action, it's a little bit different. So we all can understand the reason to be happy, but realistically speaking, it's not so easy. And to this, the Rebbe is going to address. And the Rebbe wants us to bring it down to action. The Rebbe wants us, this chapter is the last chapter in the series of happiness. How do we master happiness? So the Rebbe will begin by asking who was totally connected to God all their life, and the Rabbi is going to bring examples. Then the Rebbe is going to apply it to us, and the Rebbe is going to teach us a lesson from tzedakah, giving tzedakah, and then the Rebbe will bring it all full circle to summarize the last 7 chapters that we have been discussing. So I want to share with you beforehand sections of the text. I do hope to study the entire chapter today. At first, the rabbi is asking, who was very, very happy all their life? And the answer is our forefathers, Moses, and our prophets. And the reason is because they had a soul of Atzilut, a much closer, so they sense God. Once you sense God, it's impossible for you to get despair, to be depressed. You never heard of them being depressed because they were much closer. They sense godliness, and therefore it enabled them and energized them to enjoy every moment of their life. Says the Rebbe, how will it work for us? I am not a neshama of Atzilut. I am not that sensitive to godliness. I'm not that close. For that, the Rebbe says there are times where we can infuse ourselves with positive energy and connection to God. Those moments, and the Rabbi is going to talk about specific activity where we can connect to God, and that's when the Rebbe is going to use tzedakah to help us understand that in tzedakah the obligation is to give only tithe, only 10%. The maximum is 20%. We're not allowed to give more than 20% to tzedakah. So all the assets become holy. All the assets are blessed by God. It's considered holy, even though I only gave 20%. And in fact, God says, if you give 10%, I will bless you 10 times as much. In other words, God is returning to us not only the 10% that we gave, but 10 times as much, because God wants to show us that it affects all our assets. The same is if we were to dedicate ourselves to a specific activity, as the Rabbi is going to talk about, even though it's done in a very short period every day, yet it will make us be filled with positive energy, which will drive the idea of joy home. Yes, Harry.
Was father whose father was in constant mourning, couldn't enjoy us.
Yaakov was actually in a mourning state, and he refused to change. And actually, you're making a good point, but during those years, 22 years, actually God never spoke to him. In other words, he was separated from God. So you're actually supporting my point of view. The reason, the connection to God had made them a very happy people. And when Yaakov refused to live a happy life due to personal tragedy, God wasn't with him. He did not sense godliness. God departed from him. So if I want to sense godliness with me, you know what's the best trait? Bitul, self-nullification. I have no opinion, and I have no idea, and I have no issue, but I am willing to ride with the tide, to accept whatever God hands me as God's will. That's when we become one with God, and that will enable us to be happy people, as we'll see soon. Here it is. I'm going to start reading because I want to study the whole chapter today. Says the Rebbe, it is known that the patriarchs are truly the divine chariot. What is chariot? Totally nullified to its rider. The chariot has no will of its own. The chariot will follow the direction that the rider decides. Throughout their lives, they did not cease even momentarily from binding the mind and soul to the master of the universe. With the aforementioned absolute surrender to his unity, that is, the constant awareness of God's unity, led them to be continuously in a state of self-nullification before God. And as explained more fully in chapter 23, this self-nullification is what is meant by the term chariot, a vehicle submissive to the will of its pilot. After them, the forefathers, came all the prophets, who similarly nullified themselves before God's unity in varying degrees, each according to the level of his soul and his understanding. The rank of our teacher Moses, peace be upon him, surpassed them all. Of him, our sages said, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, spoke out of Moses' throat. His was such a total surrender to godliness that the very words he uttered were divine speech. The relation of Moses' throat to divine speech was that of one's throat to his own speech. Moshe, what was the greatest trait of Moshe? being humble, the most humble human ever existed. And therefore, he got closer than any other human being. No human being before or after ever got closer to God than Moshe. That's why our sages tell us that if a prophet comes, and he's proven a prophet, and he changes or deviates from Moshe's commandments, we say that he's a false prophet, because God has made it clear that no one will ever come as close as Moshe. In other words, the idea of forefathers, the reason that they're bound with God, their chariots, is only because of self-nullification. In Hebrew, the word is bitul. They are totally nullified before God. They have no mind of their own other than just total surrender to God. By the way, that's the purpose of marriage. In marriage, we do not marry the same gender for that specific reason, so that we are opposites and we learn to bend, we learn to change, we learn to walk or be there for somebody else. We learn that the universe is going to be complete when someone else is happy or provided what their needs are, and it is very hard. Each one of the two will come and say, I'm not used to it. I've never had such a person in my life. Well, that's the purpose of marriage, to learn to change, to learn to humble yourself. Says the Rabbi at Mount Sinai, Israel was privileged to experience a glimpse of this level of self-nullification. When God came down Mount Sinai, that was the time when they were totally self-nullified. But they could not endure it. As our sages have said, at every divine utterance, their souls took flight. Their souls ran away from their bodies. And God resurrected them each time. This flight of the soul actually represents the self-nullification spoken of previously. Therefore, because they were unable to live with this feeling of self-surrender before God, he commanded them immediately to erect for him a sanctuary in which would be the Holy of Holies, wherein his presence will dwell. That is, there his unity would be revealed, as will be explained further. The rabbi is going to talk about the Mishkan, the tabernacle, much later. So the rabbi is saying is that those people who are close to God achieved the greatest level of joy and happiness because they nullified themselves with God, for God. Once they nullified themselves before God, they were united with God in a revealed way. And by doing so, they felt godliness. And therefore, they were very happy, as we discovered last week. I just want to share with you the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab. Once he was invited to a meeting of many rabbis, and they noticed that when he washed for bread, he poured water 3 times on the right, 3 times on the left. Until then, it was accustomed to pour 2 times, only 2 times. He did 3 times. Today, all the Hasidim do 3. It started from the Rebbe Rashab. So one of the rabbis turned to him and says, I noticed that you poured 3 times on each hand. Where is the source for it in the Torah? Where did you come up with? And the Rabbi Rashab says, I'll tell you the honest truth, I don't know where the source is, but I know it's according to Torah. Why? He says, because when I was bar mitzvah, my father, the 4th Chabad Rebbe, the Rebbe Maharash, called me for a private audience, and he said to me, today you become bar mitzvah, you need to learn all of Jewish law, every conduct in every day and every part of your life. You need to learn how and what, and I need you to it should be embedded in your body, not in your mind, in your body. And he says, for a few months, I took to study Jewish law, the entire Shulchan Aruch he studied, and then it took him a few months to train every body parts, what to do, when, and how. And he says that that's what his words, I trained my body to do exactly what code of law says to do. So I know if my body acted in a certain way, I may not be able to quote the source, but I guarantee you there is a source for us in Torah. In other words, I'm not expecting people to be able to reach that level, but the idea is self-nullification. The idea of bitul, if we nullify ourselves, we are bonding with God. Why is it so important to bond with God? Because it will make us a much happier life. Because it gives us here, let alone about what happens in the world to come. Here on earth, We overcome challenges and difficulties when people disappoint us, when people don't deliver on the promises, when the expectation is not met. We are happy because we are part of God. If we sense that, we move it from emunah, from blind faith, into bitachon, trust, as Linda was asking last week and went back and forth. In other words, it comes to reality, and we'll talk about it a little more soon. What? I don't know. Did you know about 3 times?
Done it here. My father used to do it twice.
All right, so non-Hasidim do it twice, because code of law says only twice, but Hasidim do it 3 times. I'm not going to venture to try and find the source for it. I don't think so.
Sure.
The point I'm making is that the Rebbe turned, and with certainty, he said, if my body did it, I am sure that it did according to law, because I took my body, he walked on his body. That applies to holy men, real holy men. By the way, what defines a holy man? It's very interesting. People might think a holy man is someone who studied a lot of Torah, or someone who is immersed in the study of Torah all day. He sits and studies Torah, he must be holy. What we learn that holiness equals bitul, nullification. The more we nullify ourselves, the holier we get. I have a lot of stories for you later on to another point. In the same vein, the rabbis are making, I'm going to show you, you may be laying bricks in the street under the sun and be a very completely holy person. You know why? You don't get angry at anybody. And you know that that's God's will. And by doing so, you do it with great joy and happiness. That's a holy person. That's what is defined as holy. In other religion, a holy man is someone who refrained from family life, or someone who is a monk and hiding in a cave, or someone who is immersed in the teaching of others and studying. Judaism defines holiness as bitul, as self-nullification. Moshe, the pinnacle of humanity, who the Torah describes as half human, half angel, the uniqueness of Moshe, he was not an orator, and I'm not sure how much studying Torah, nobody studied like him, because his body of studying is God himself. So I cannot speak to the study of Moshe. But the fact is that he was busy with communal affairs all the time. What made him so superb superior to anybody is the level of humility that he possessed. And as the Torah tells us, as God tells us. So if I want to define a holy man, I define it as someone who is very humble before any human being, before any, in every situation and at all occasions. In other words, even when there was reasons, and I have some nice stories to drive that point. So again, what we studied so far is that our forefathers, prophets, Moshe, what made them unique and connected to God is their soul enabled them to sense God, and they were totally nullified. If they were totally nullified, it achieved that they felt godliness everywhere all the time. Therefore, they are very happy people. The rabbi continue. I'm going to continue reading. The Alter Rebbe points out below that when one specific place is singled out as an abode for God's presence, despite the fact that the glory of the fills the entire earth, the uniqueness of this site lies in the revelation of godliness which occurs there, in contrast to the rest of the world, where God's unity is as the sole existing being stands concealed. In the abode of God's presence, it is clearly apparent that there is not besides him. We thus see that the revelation of God's unity, which the Jewish people experienced at Mount Sinai, but which they could not endure, was continued by means of the sanctuary. And the rabbi is going to continue. In other words, what the rabbi is going to tell us, God revealed himself to such a great level that they lost their mind. Their soul departed their body. So God says, you know what, I'll do that revelation in a specific area, only in a specific place. And there, I will be revealed. As we know, there were miracles in the Holy of Holies. But the rest of life for a Jew would be a normal day-to-day life. They will not feel godliness, it will be concealed. The rabbi now goes to say the following, and that's the point of how it will apply to me in my day-to-day life. Says the rabbi, when here it is, I'm going to read, this is a text that appears in Medrash, in the Talmud. Ever since the temple was destroyed, the 4 cubits of the halacha, that is, study of Jewish law, is the only sanctuary and abode which the Holy One, blessed be He, is in His world. That is, the Torah is the only abode for the revelation of His unity. Why? For the halachot set out before us are the actual embodiment of God's will and wisdom, which are one with God. The halachic ruling represents the divine will, and what underlies it is divine wisdom. Hence, in the Torah, God's unity stands revealed. What the rabbi is saying the following. Says the Rebbe, after God destroyed the temple, where does God reveal himself that I can bind with God and experience God to a great level? Study Torah, in particular, the part of Torah that's called halacha, Jewish law. Why Jewish law will reveal God's wisdom and will to a greater level than study Talmud or Mishnah, even though Mishnah and Talmud is also part of halacha, but not as much as code of law. It is because what is halacha? Halacha tells you how to conduct yourself even though you disagree. I don't understand why kosher we're restricted in our diet. What's wrong? Today they make it healthy and there is no problem. Why is there no igniting fire on Shabbat? Today you can just walk through the room and the light would be turned on. We have questions against halacha that are common sense. They make sense. We should ask, why kosher food is more expensive? How come for 7 days no bread? What's the difference? You have a lot of questions. It comes from a place of selfness, because I feel myself, because my mind is asking questions. That's great. You should ask, you should inquire, but you should realize that God's will is not that way. God's will is to do differently. And when you nullify yourself, you humble yourself, and you accept God's will in action, that's where God is revealed, and that's where you can bind with God. Humility. So in other words, the study of Torah in general, you connect to God, but God's will reveal himself in the part of Jewish law far greater than studying any other part of Torah. Why? Because it assists us in serving God and not doing what makes sense to me. And that's the idea. That equals bitul. Did everybody understand that? So therefore, here is a story. Actually, I have a few more stories. That's why at tzaddik, the Talmud tells us, tzaddik gozer ve'akadosh baruch hu mekayem. There are times when the tzaddik will decree and God will fulfill it. There is a story I just studied in Mishnah about Choni. I studied it in Talmud. Choni, anybody heard of Choni that made a circle? Choni HaMe'agel. The Talmud tells us there was no water, there was drought, no rain. So Choni turned and made a circle in the ground and says, God, I'm not leaving this circle until you bring rain. And then there was little droplets came and he says, that's not what I asked. So then there was heavy rain that destroyed half the universe. He says, that's a curse. I want a blessing of rain. So the proper rain came. And then they came to him and says, there is enough rain. It's too much. We are sinking. We're going to drown. So he said to God, please stop me. The rabbis at the time sent a message to Choni and say, if an ordinary person spoke in such a despicable, disrespectful way before God, they should have been excommunicated. But you are a God's servant. He loves you like a little child, and you can mess up and you can do whatever you want, pull his beard, whatever you do, he still loves you. In other words, because a tzaddik is so humble and so bitul, there's one with God, and therefore God sends their needs or their wants, and he fulfills it. That's why a tzaddik can ask, and God will fulfill. Now I want to go back to halacha, Jewish law. people don't understand, not you, but some people do not understand the distinction between Jewish law versus study Torah. They both are study Torah and you fulfill a great mitzvah. But Jewish law binds us with God to a much greater and more revealed way, because the bitul there is far greater, because I put aside my intelligence, my common sense, and I do what as God wishes. There was a story with the third Lubavitcher Rebbe. A man has left town for hunting, and he never came back, and two of his buddies returned back and says they saw him, that he died. And they testify in front of court, the Jewish court, that the husband died. So the wife now is a widow. She can go and marry. So a couple of months go by. In those days, living alone, particularly for women, was impossible. Financially, it was impossible. So she was looking for a husband. She found a husband. And they got engaged and they were getting ready to get married. As they were getting ready to get married, the husband appears back in town. So turned out that the husband created that ploy to put his wife in the corner. He wanted her to get married, and then she's a married wife. To be married to another man, she has to go out from both husbands. She cannot live with any one of them. And if there were children involved, they are illegitimate children. So he wanted to corner her. The entire town was up and up. So he hired these bodies to serve as witnesses. Actually, they were false witnesses. So they came to the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Lubavitcher Rebbe. He heard it, and he says, because the Jewish court has ruled that she is allowed to marry and the husband is dead, this is what will happen, this is what's going to happen, and she's allowed to marry this man. She should prepare for the wedding. And she continued preparing for the wedding. And a few days before the wedding, the husband died. In other words, if Jewish law rules, God will turn the universe upside down to follow the halacha. The first husband, the one who cheated, the one who the court ruled that he's dead. Once they accepted a legitimate witness, even though they were false witnesses, he is considered dead from a Jewish point of view. The fact that he showed up did not change the reality, and the woman was allowed to marry because she followed Jewish law. Then there is another story, it doesn't drive that point so deep, but it's an important point. There was a famous rabbi, Rabbi Yechezkel Landau, who is known as the Noda B'Yehuda. He was a famous rabbi, he was a rabbi of Prague. Prague was the largest one, probably one of the largest Jewish cities in the 17th century, 300 years ago. When he was appointed, he was a very young man. And some machers, some leaders, didn't like that a young rabbi is going to tell them when to stand up, when to sit, where to go. So there was a very wealthy man, apparently he was also a scholar. He decided to trip the rabbi. By tripping the rabbi, it means he's not fit for the community and they'll fire him. So he hired either a maid or a young boy, and he went and explained them a question that happened in the butcher shop. He told the man to go to the butcher shop and tell the butcher shop to send a maid or to send a messenger to say that they slaughtered a cow, and in the cow they found such and such question, and they don't know whether it is kosher or not. Now, to make it non-kosher, it means a great financial loss, because a cow that becomes non-kosher, it's thousands of dollars, those days, thousands of rubles. It was some people would lose their business over these issues. So they came, he just was hired within the 10 days that he was hired. The girl comes in and says, I was asked by the butcher to ask the following question, such and such. The Noda B'Yehuda thought for a moment, and he said, the rule is such and such. He gave him the ruling. I don't remember what the ruling, either kosher or non-kosher, but he gave him the ruling. As soon as she returned to the butcher, this rich man who was waiting, that's what he wanted to hear. Because the same question was asked hundreds of years earlier, and it was in a responsa from a previous rabbi that lived 300 years earlier that probably most people weren't aware of. And he knew that. That's what he searched. He searched for something to trip the rabbi. So he ran and he summoned the entire community and they called the rabbi, the new rabbi, for a meeting. He asked for a meeting. At the meeting, he asked the rabbi, did you rule such and such? And the rabbi in public in front of the board. And he said, yes. And the man turned to the rabbi, do you not fit for a rabbi? Because the ruling should be the opposite. And here is the source. He opened up a book and he said to him. And the rabbi turned to him and he says, it must be that this question did not happen, but you fabricated the question. Is that true or not? And the man said, yeah, I fabricated the question and it didn't happen. And the rabbi says, now I know why I failed in this question. Because had that been a true situation, God would have helped me to know the right answer. The reason I did not know the right answer, and I gave you the wrong answer, is because it wasn't effective. It wasn't important for determining whether it's kosher or not, because it never happened. It's something you created. And the community realized that this man, the rich man, was there to trip the rabbi. But I learned, and all of us learned, that when someone needs to give halacha, they are giving God's energy, God's power to do what's right. Why? Because God's revelation, when the temple stood, it was Holy of Holies. When the temple destroyed, tell us that the Talmud and the Mishnah, it was the 4 cubits of halacha. In halacha, you can find God's revelations. It works both ways. On one hand, if I study halacha and you study halacha, we are surrendering our will to God's will. By doing so, we are bonding much closer to God. On the other hand, God will assist those who need to give the proper halacha. He will assist them with ability to make the right answer, because that's where God reveals himself. I hope I made myself clear. So therefore, says the Rebbe, you may not be able to be like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to live all your life like a chariot, because your soul is not from that level. But you can study halacha, a little bit of halacha, 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day. By doing so, you're bonding with God, because you learn what God wants, and you say, I'm going to do what God wants. By doing so, you are actually giving yourself into God. Ali, any questions?
The 4 cubits of halacha of Torah.
What?
The 4 cubits of halacha.
Yeah. What's the question?
What is that? That's the Torah?
That's halacha. Halacha is Jewish law.
Mm-hmm.
It is code of law to learn what to do.
So the 4 cubits.
4 cubits is figuratively, meaning a small space.
Right.
The Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, at the early years of his leadership, when he spoke, one time he spoke of a following parable. He says that once a king visited a town, and when a rich man discovered that the king is visiting, he invited him over to his house. And when he came to the house, the rich man says, the entire palace is yours. You can use the entire palace. And the king turned to him and says, no, I don't need the entire palace. I want one single room, but on one condition. I want that room to be mine privately, only mine. No hidden cameras, no knocking on the doors, no noise out of the walls. And the rich man turned to the king and says, you're my king. You can have the entire palace. And the king said, the Rebbe cried a lot when he said that. He says, the King of Kings is coming to visit us. He does not demand the entire house. He don't want your life. He don't want everything. He wants one room. But that room should be completely his. Give him a room. And that's halacha. That's 4 cubits of halacha. You dedicate yourself to halacha and you follow through. Even if it's expensive, even if it makes no sense. That's bitul. That's when we get connected to God. The rabbi is going to go on to many others, and I have some stories for you. Therefore, after one meditates deeply according to his ability on the subject of this above-mentioned self-nullification. Let him reflect on his heart as follows. The Rebbe speaks in a present tense. The capacity of my intelligence and of my soul's root is too limited to constitute a chariot and an abode for God's unity in perfect truth. I don't have such a soul. For my thought cannot grasp or apprehend this unity at all with any degree of comprehension in this world. Not an iota, in fact, of that which was grasped by the patriarchs and the prophets, who were God's chariot and abode by virtue of their awareness of God's unity as they grasped it. This being so, I will make him a sanctuary and an abode by studying Torah at a fixed time, by day and by night, to the extent of my free time. In other words, just like God appointed a temple, a sanctuary where he reveals himself, because the Jewish people could not contain godliness, so is when there is no temple, God reveals himself in the study of Torah, and particularly in Torah of halacha. As stipulated by the law governing each individual situation set forth in the laws of Torah study, as our sages say, even one chapter in the morning and one at night, etc., suffice for one who can manage no more. For him to be regarded as engaging in Torah study day and night, therefore, by fulfilling this minimal quota, I too will become an abode for godliness. Thereby his heart shall rejoice, he shall be glad and offer joyous thanks for his fortune, in meriting to be a host to the Almighty through his study of Torah, which caused him to be a sanctuary for God, twice each day, according to the extent of his available time and according to the capacity which God has granted him. Very few story. The idea that we can take one small part of the day, as the rabbi is going to talk about tzedakah, I told you, that 10% will bless the other 90%. So if I take a couple of minutes in the morning, a couple of minutes at night to study Torah, particularly Jewish law, it will affect the entire day and make me humble, and bitul will be expressed. There was a famous businessman, very successful. His name is, I'm going to say names now, Reb Abba Ginsburg. He was known in Minsk as one of the richest men in general. He owned the building in which the bank was operating. So he was very close to money. He was very, very, very well to do. One day, he came to the Rebbe Rashab. This is in the 18th century. He came to the Rebbe and he says to the Rebbe that he has no time to study Torah. His businesses, he owned many real estates and he owned forests. He used to lease forests to chop the wood and run them through the rivers down and deal with the commodities. It was his day and night was preoccupied with business. He was doing very well. He was a pious man, but he had no time to study Torah. He was asking the Rebbe for a permit, a license to escape study Torah. And the Rebbe turned to him and he says, you know, the only reason God had blessed you is for you to be able to say, thank you, God, for my richness. And despite the challenge of richness, I'll study Torah. Do you like for God to give you another challenge called the challenge of poverty, where you will be starving and worried, where would you find next day bread? And then say, well, maybe should I connect to God through the study of Torah so God should bless me? In other words, what the Rebbe was telling him, that the richness somehow is used by him as a reason to be separated from God, where instead of appreciating and connecting even deeper to God by the blessing God had granted him. So he left the Rebbe's room, and he was totally broken. He realized that Hashem is blessing him, and he uses the blessing, because he's busy with business, to stay away from God. And God could have taken away that blessing, and then he'll connect to God. So he decided to do what we call cheshbon hanefesh, a real stock taking, an inventory taking about his life, to see what's important, what's not. And he decided that he don't want to do business anymore. He's going to sell all his ventures. He's going to take half of it and put it in charity. It's called the Foundation for Afterlife. It's called legacy. So after he dies, people will study Torah, poor men will be clothed with his funds. Half of it. The other half is going to support himself for the rest of his life, so he don't have to go. He also hired a teacher to teach him to spend time, because he didn't know to study too much. He hired a private teacher with the assets and to study Torah all day long. But he decided the Rebbe is his boss, so he should consult the Rebbe. So after he had a plan laid out, he came to visit the Rebbe, and he said to the Rebbe, after hearing the Rebbe's words, he's decided that he's going to sell his businesses, all of it, stop working, give half of it for charity for the world after he dies. The other half he would use, he already hired a teacher to study with him every day and to support him himself. So this way, he studied Torah. He will do what God wants from us. The Rebbe turned to him and says, it's very kind of you, very nice of you to realize that your life needs a major overhaul. But there are parts that I agree, some parts I don't agree. First, to say the idea to sell your ventures and take half of it to give to the tzedakah after your life, no. You give the tzedakah now. While you're alive, share it with people. You make the choices and you give it to people that you see they need it. Second is for you to go out of business. No good. Because you're supposed to go to business and work in this universe. And the third one, you hired a teacher to study with you all day long. That's great. You should do that. And based on your business ventures, work with the teachers those hours that you can, and this way you should live a life. And that's what he did. He went and sold half his businesses, half his ventures. He gave it. He actually came back to the Rebbe, he asked the Rebbe to distribute it, gave that money, which was a huge sum. The second half of his business, he continued to live, making a living off of it. He can live very comfortably. He hired a teacher, and whenever he wasn't in the business, he would study Torah. In other words, you serve God not when you do what you feel is right, not when you feel that's the best way for me to serve God. There is a way of us to live a life by being bitul, and part of it is to go to work. Another story. The name is Rabbi Yehuda Eisel of Homel. Yehuda Isaac of Homel came to the Rebbe. I believe it's the same Rebbe Rashab. And there was a lot of visitors, a lot of guests that came for the holiday. And the way out, they all stopped by the Rebbe. Actually, it was a earlier Rebbe. And the way out, they all stopped by the Rebbe and asked for blessings. When his turn came, he was a great scholar. When his turn came, the Rebbe turned to him and says, he says, Rebbe, give me a blessing. And the Rebbe says, sure, I bless you. Go and buy yourself a store and start selling merchandise. He thought he didn't hear correctly. He didn't hear well. He left, he was shocked. The Rebbe is asking him to go to business. He's studying Torah. He consulted his friends, and they all advised him to return back to the Rebbe and ask the same question again. So he came back to the Rebbe and he says, Rebbe, I asked for a blessing. You told me to open up a store. Is that what you meant for me? I'm a scholar. And the Rebbe says to him, you know, Leipzig is a town in Poland that there was a lot of shows like Vegas or Orlando. Merchants, businessmen that were very successful would stay in Leipzig for 9 months. 9 months is the duration of the marketplace that took place. Now, He says there is a town called Kermanzog or Shkalov. He says there are people in new town of Shkalov. Shkalov is another town. They are known as the merchants of Shkalov. But the idea is that they are spending 9 months in Leipzig and only 3 months in Shkalov. In other words, for 9 months they sell and buy and buy and sell and sell and buy. And then whatever they find that's fitting for their town, they bring back. And they spend only 3 months with their families, then 9 months they're back in Leipzig. Why is it that they're called the leaders, the merchants of Shkalov? They should be named the merchants of Leipzig. And the reason is because that's where they live, and that's the reason they're making a living, so they can bring food and support their family who lives in Shkalov. I need you to understand that going into business is not because you're going to become rich. It's so that you are able to study Torah without help of anybody, any support from the outside. So you might be 8 hours of day in the store and only 2 hours in yeshiva study Torah, but you should be called a Torah scholar for the 2 hours rather than spending a whole day. In other words, we need to understand that the idea of 4 cubits, when it says 4 cubits of halacha, it refers to not only in time but also in nefesh. This is the essence. I am a Shkalov merchant. The fact that I'm spending 9 months, for 3/4 of time in Leipzig, does not change that, because I should be immersing myself inside of Torah. It may not be all day, it may be 10, 15 minutes in the morning, 10, 15 minutes in the evening. Yes.
Say, Shalom, send good news to Africa, and say going to mining.
That's it. That's the same thing.
And the rest is history.
And the rest is, and there were many other situations like that. The following is another story, just on the reverse. In Israel, in the 40s, there was even today, but then making a living was extremely, extremely difficult. If you found a job, even if it didn't even pay the bills, you're very lucky. Living in Israel was very challenging. There were 2 Hasidim, old Hasidim, who escaped Russia and moved to Israel. They were not that old at the time. And one of them is Rabbi Chaim Moshe Alperovich. I knew his children. His grandchildren are classmates of mine. This man was known as a very holy man, and he went to find a job. He found a job to build walls in homes, to install bricks, to put the cinder blocks one on top of the other. You can imagine they had to carry the blocks, they had to set the cement, and they have to put it up, and it's all under the sun. And by the way, they couldn't afford sunscreen. So it was they wore a very wide brim hat and a shirt that covered all their sleeves and legs, but it was very hot. They were soaking all day long. Their boss, the owner of the business, the contractor, sensed about these 2 Hasidim that they are very holy people because they're very humble. So he did not want them working so hard. So he turned to Reb Chaim Moshe, this man, and he says to him, I saw by the way you laying the cinder blocks that you are very good at math. You know the numbers. You have your numbers figured very well. I would like to upgrade you. I'm going to move you into my office. You're going to be my accountant. You're going to look through the books. You're going to work the books and salaries. And this Jew turned to him and he says, no way. I don't want to be an accountant. The guy says, why? It's under air conditioning. There was no AC. There was fans. There was fan. But you won't have to carry anything. And Reb Chaim Moshe said to him, you know, when you asking me to be an accountant, you want me to work with my head. My head have to be occupied with doing the numbers. But I want my head to be connected to God. When I put down cinder blocks and I carry them on my shoulders, on my back, I am always repeating Torah passages. I always repeat what I studied this morning so I can remember it forever. I refuse to do that because my life is not about work. My life is about connecting to God. I can connect to God better when I am able to study while I do my work. So he refused to take an easier job because he felt that the purpose of life is not for the job. And finally, one more story. The rabbi, the name is Rabbi Avram Landau, was a businessman. One day, he and his partner, this was 120 years ago. One day, he and his business partners decided to go to the big town to buy merchandise. So they made up to meet at 9 a.m. in the morning and take the buggy, the horse and buggy. 9 o'clock shows up and the man is not there. And he didn't have his mobile phone with him. So he start looking for him, knocking on the door. He's not home. He's going to the stores. Did you see Rabbi Avram? No. Finally, he goes to synagogue. He see Avram sitting and studying Torah. So he said, Avram, we made up at 9 o'clock. We're supposed to go. You know, it's going to take a very long hour, many hours to get to the other town. What happened? Why didn't you come to meet me at a given place? Rabbi Avram turned to him and says, tell me, if we left on time and arrived on time, what good does it do? He said, oh, what good does it do? We would be first to find good merchandise. And let's say we found all the good merchandise. What good will it do? Well, we'll get a good deal. And what if we get a good deal? Well, we can return them early. And if we can return them early, how good it does? He says, well, then we'll be able to sell at a good profit. And he says, so we sold it at a good profit. What do we do with the money? Well, with the money, we can sit and study Torah without worry. So Abraham says, so you see, that's exactly what I'm doing. You had so many ifs. If we arrive early, not sure. If we find good merchandise, not sure. If we got a good deal, if we bought it and everybody bought it, all that is a if. But I'm studying Torah, so why do I have to go through the full cycle before I can get to study Torah? I'm sure you heard that a similar story about a young man sitting at a park, and an old retired person says, young man, what are you doing here? Did you hear that? No? This is a true story, but the other story I always heard, and a retired man finally retired after working so hard, he earned enough to retire. So what does he do the first day he retires? He decides to take a walk through the park. He comes to the park, he sees a young man in his mid-20s sitting down on the ground, on the grass and relaxing. He turns to him and says, young man, why are you here? And the man says, why? Because I enjoyed nature, I enjoyed the sun. And the man says, you enjoy the sun? You're a young man. It's a waste of your time. You can do much better than that. And the young man says, yeah, what can I do better? He says, well, you have all the muscles and the strength. Go to work. Now it's time. Not like me, I'm 77 and it's out for me. And the young man says, yes, so what will happen if I work very hard? He says, well, you'll get promotion. And what will that do? He says, you'll be able to earn more than what average person. And what will that do? Oh, well, you can buy yourself a house, start a family. And what will that do? Well, you'll be able to save. And what will that do if I can save all the money that you're talking about? He said, after many, many years of hard work, and you will save lots of money, you'll be able to retire. And the young man says, and if I retire, what will that do for me? He says, well, then you'll be like me. You can take a walk through the park and enjoy the sun. And the young man turns to him and says, and what am I doing now?
This guy, son says, we're here to say, she says, I don't have a Google on. You have to do it there. I can sit in the sun.
I don't understand. I did not
I
understand.
don't have Google. I'm a multi-billionaire. At 22, I could sit in the sun.
All right, all right. So we will stop here, even though I wanted to finish. What the rabbi is saying to us is that if you want to connect to live a happy life, as the rabbi is going to continue next week, we're going to study it. The first thing is humble yourself, because humility binds us with God. When you bound with God, you bring it from faith into trust. You bring it into reality, and then God will be revealed. If God is revealed, you will be a very happy man, because you'll realize that it's all from God and it has to be good. Again, we'll continue next week, Adwale. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody. See you next time.